This is a long-awaited video on the Dynaco or Dynakit Stereo 70 rebuilds, and this is specifically about a case when you already do not have the original, the stock version, but you have a heavily modified version. And would I recommend to go back to the original or not? And this was inspired by Alan's question, because he built a kit, the VTA ST120, which is not the Stereo 70s mod. I mean, not the Stereo 120s mod, which is a solid state amp, but it's a Stereo 70 converted to a 60 watt per channel amp by using KT88s in the output section, plus 12 AU7s in the driver section. And Alan is asking that he would like to reconnect with the original tone and how to go back to the original Dynaco. And that's a really hard question, partially because I have not heard yet that VTA mode with the 12AU7 and KT88s, so I cannot tell exactly how the tone would change. I would ask you, Alan, if you had a chance to hear the stock version of the Stereo 70 before you did the rebuild. Have you heard it in the original version? And what were your impressions between the two? Because I don't know if you would like the original or not after you are used to a really pumped up version, because eventually the success of the tonality of the Dynaco Stereo 70, it totally depends on your loudspeaker. So to have that great mid-range, you also need to use it with a loudspeaker that can deliver on the mid-range front. And eventually the vast number of the Stereo 70 mods which completely change the driver circuitry, even the output tubes, it's because 95, or I would say 99% of the loudspeakers out there do not have a good mid-range. And even if we improve the amplifier, we are not going to get those gains show up for us. And when people improve the frequency response of the Dynaco by changing the driver board to other tubes, like the 12AU7, which can provide a stronger drive, which means you will get a wider frequency range with average loudspeakers that will translate into bigger gains. And that's why all of those kits and mods which are out there, like the Joe Curcio mod, VTA mod, and just about an infinite number of mods, whether people have started making new kits on them or they just did it on their own. That's why they are so successful, because basically all of them attack the frequency response and make the Dynaco make more lows and more highs with average loudspeakers. And so for that direction, to get the tonality out of it that I'm recommending to everyone, first of all, you need a good loudspeaker, which means what? I will show that in the next episode. I will talk about matching loudspeakers with which you can fully utilize the terrific mid-range of the original version. However, if you do not have those kinds of loudspeakers, and you don't want to build one, because I can tell that it's pretty easy and pretty cheap to build one such loudspeaker. But it's totally up to your taste whether you would like it or not, because it's going to be all about the mid-range. You are not going to have as low lows as high highs, but you are going to hear much more musical instruments and not frequency bands. And it's totally people dependent, because many of my audiophile friends, they do not absolutely care for that sound. They really want those super extensions, lows and highs, and the first thing that they would do is just add the subwoofer and add super tweeter and so on to that. But there's a big number of my audiophile friends who absolutely die for the mid-range, and they don't even care about adding a sub or a tweeter or anything, because when you do that, you are compromising the mid-range. There's no way about it. And so if you really miss something in your current music experience, and when you are listening to your setup, even though you have a lot of bass and a lot of high frequencies, but you think that they do not sound right, then this solution will be for you. If you really love and crave the power in the amp that you have now in the modified Dynaco, then going back to the stock, you would probably lose a little bit of that power feeling, or I would say it will change to quite a bit of a degree. It will not be a forceful sound anymore. It will be much more relaxed. To my ears and some of my friends' ears, even the bass will get much more shaded. There will be much more information revealed in it, but the quantity of the bass will not be so much as you have with the various Dynaco mods. So you will not have that EQ'd up effect, because to my ears, these Dynaco mods bring up the level of the bass and the level of the high frequencies to more than what I feel it's normal and natural. And we tend to get addicted to these high EQ'd bass, high EQ'd highs, and if you do A/B test, you will always prefer that, but over the years, when you are listening to it, you will get jaded with it. So here I show what was my proven recipe to keep the original tone of the Stereo 70, but when you play around with Stereo 70, you know that the stock version does not have near its full potential for resolution, and it's not a revealing system. It hides a lot of details of the music, and you can improve quite a bit the I would say the refinement and of the Stereo 70, just by improving parts quality and improving power supply quite a bit without touching the circuitry. Because what people think why they play around with circuitry is because the driver tubes could be beefier, could be more powerful, and I agree with that. Yes, they could be more powerful and beefier, but the way it is designed and built it just results in perfect, fantastic musical tonality. And another way to beef up the driver circuitry is you do not have to take this nice musical part of the amplifier out. You can keep it, just feed it with better quality parts. So improve on your wiring, improve on the capacitors that feed these tubes, improve on the solder quality, and first of all, improve on the power supply that feeds the tubes. And the number one that you need to improve is the bias supply. So this is talking about the power tubes now, not the driver section. So the power tubes in the Dynaco Stereo 70 are run on fixed bias. So it means that the tubes are getting a negative voltage on their grid, and that sets their standby current. And this bias supply is beyond flimsy. So it's just a CRC supply, basically a tiny capacitor, a resistor, and another tiny capacitor. So this means that the bias supply hums like crazy. And you do not hear this hum only because the Stereo 70 has loads of negative feedback, and that gets rid of that hum for you. However, there's no free lunch, and this high level of hum basically is destroying a lot of low signal level and lot of base information. And that's, I would say, that is the Achilles heel of the Stereo 70, and it's really easy to fix that. Instead of keeping those, I think it's about like 50 microfarad capacitors in the diode supply, put in really beefy ones. I think for mine I put in 1500 microfarads, so really beefed it up. And of course, if you are still using the old diode in it that came with it, if you have a stock unit, then please use that. That old technology diode, it can go up in flames anytime, and when it happens, all your power tubes will be cooked and you need to buy a new set, and possibly it will take the output transformers as well. So basically you need to buy a new amp, spend as much on it. So do not keep those stock selenium rectifiers, but use a fast or ultra fast or Schottky diode in that position. So if you look into your Dyna, and for even if you use a modified version, any kind, check it out. If you use a regular slow diode, which is the 1N4007 most likely, then get rid of that. In general, never use the 1N series regular slow diodes in stereo equipment. Change it for ultra fast diodes or Schottkys or Krees. So if you look at catalog numbers, like these ultra fast ones are like U, they have U designation, like 1U4007 or UF or FR. These diodes cost a few cents more than the 1N, so you won't be spending more than $1 on each diode, so don't worry, this is not an expensive mod. But it's absolutely vital to wake up the amp. So that's part of the reason why the stock sounds like slowish and sluggish, because of these slow diodes or the selenium rectifier, which is also a slower, sluggish old technology. So basically that's what you need to do with the bias supply, an ultra fast diode, and beefed up capacitance, so that will create a quiet bias supply. You can even improve it just by adding an extra RC section. So instead of having two capacitors and a diode, may add an extra pi filter, so it's a CRCRC filter. and that will create an ultra quiet bias supply, and that's like a super easy mode, very cheap. Probably it will be under $10 to for all the parts to do it, and that will bring a vast improvement, and that's what it did for me. You can also add diodes to decouple the power supply stages. This is something new, and my mentors too invented this thing, and it is the same thing as the BIOS mode, just use a diode, but here we are using the diode in the high voltage supply to decouple each stage from each other. And it's like the cheapest mode on the earth. It's basically like less than $1 per diode, and you need maybe like 4 diodes or so, and it mimics the effect of having a separate power supply for each tube stage and each channel. The difference is just beyond vast. So the dynamics and power capacity will just really skyrocket if you do this trick. I will take a separate video on this because this is something really major, and you can use it in any amplifier, and not just tubes. You can use this thing for solid state amps as well, and it will deserve at least one full video to explain what it is, how it's done, and how it's working. In addition, what I did on my Dyna was increase the power supply capacitance. Do not increase the input capacitance, that I think, but was that 30 microfarad, because it's just going harder on the power transformer. You don't want that. But downstream of that, just increase it a lot. So for the first stage, for the input stage, I increased the capacitance from 20 microfarad to 150 microfarad per channel, and that gives that really big dynamic range. So for all of the Dynacos, the stock Dynacos, and not just the power amps, but the past, the preamps for the Dynacos, their main dynamic and power limitation comes from that really tiny power supply capacitance for the input tubes. And if you have, for example, a Dynaco Pass preamp or any kind of preamp that has like a 20 or 30 microfarad capacitance on your input tube or first stage, then just beef it up to about 150 microfarad, and you will be astonished, because the dynamic range will open up tremendously. So what else I did? I also added a triode switch, so that I can change between pentode, I would say ultralinear mode, and triode mode, so it gives you basically an extra amplifier. One more thing is that never operate the triode switch while the amp is on. Always switch it off first, and then you can change it. If you do it during operation, you can zap yourself, and you can blow up your amp as well. So it's not a mode that to be switched on the fly when you have it in your amp. It is something that strictly when you turn off the amp, because when the amp is on, and especially when you are playing music, there's many hundred of volts, even up to a kilovolts of signal that can be swinging on the tube, and if you flip the switch in the wrong moment, wow, it will fry everything. And another thing that I did to my Dyna is that it's running at 50 milliamps per tube. In stock version, I took it down to 35 milliamp per tube. and that makes it much easier on the power transformer. That's absolutely vital, especially because today we have higher line voltages than we used to have when the Dynas were built and made in 59. I think for the new kits, new Dynacos, they have a bigger, a thicker power transformer that has more headroom, which is really good. But I suspect that their output transformers are not nearly as good as the original had. So you have pluses and minuses. If you have any experience with the new Dyna kits versus the original ones, just please post it. I only have my original ones, no new Dyna transformers, so I cannot comment personal experience with that. I did hear the Dyna clone back then when we had the shootout, which was over a decade ago. And yes, when you have the bigger power transformer, it's quite a bit more beefier. But as I said, a lot also depends on how you build your power supply and how much extra capacitance you give to your input tubes, because everyone is focused on the power tube when you think about power, but really it's all about your input tubes, because those are the number one limiting factor. And just think about that. These amplify the tiniest signal level, and if they are squeezed, then the big tubes, the power tubes, get the squeezed signal. They cannot do much about that. If the input tubes get all the chance that they need, and they are able to provide a wide response, great dynamics, then the power tubes use that wide input for output. So basically this was how I built my Stereo 70, and I used it with a loudspeaker that was perfectly matching it, and that's how I got excellent tone plus fabulous resolution level as well. Sadly now I do not have my Dyna here with me. I still have it, but it's on a different continent, so I cannot listen to it at the moment. And I'm thinking about rebuilding another one. I have the parts to build the Dyna, but I would build it now with the current knowledge that I have, which would be I would be utilizing these things that I did to my previous Dyna, except the bias. I'm taking out the fixed bias completely and changing over to cathode bias. And that's one thing that everyone can do with your amplifier, to change the fixed bias operation to cathode bias. I will explain this later with an additional video. Another thing that I will do is I will not use a circuit board for it, but will hardwire everything, and that's quite a bit of a step up. Also, we'll use coax pair, or it's also sold as Kivame, but the company is the coax pair company who makes it. Kivame is just rebranding it, and their carbon film resistors are like the Allen Bradley carbon composition resistors, but with much lower noise floor and even better mid-range. So in general, carbon film resistors have the best tonality. They beat even carbon composition, but carbon composition has been the favorite from the 50s to the 2000s, 2010s, because it's much quieter. Carbon film used to be a very noisy technology, and that's why it was avoided in stereo. But coax pair, they managed to manufacture extremely low noise carbon film, and I can really recommend it. And they are not expensive and easily, I would say not that easily, but pretty easily obtainable. Mouser has them, Parts Connection has them, And if memory serves right, I have seen that DigiKey also started carrying them. But these are available only at low wattage, like a quarter watt, half a watt, and the supply of 1 watt, 2 watt resistors of coax is really, really scarce now. The 5 watters, or you cannot really buy them. Maybe Parts Connection has a few values, but 10 years ago, you could buy the 5 watt values easily. But for some reason now, the past couple of years, all the suppliers are running out of the 5 watt models, and there's no resupply of that. So for the higher wattage resistors, I will use thick film resistors or DAILs, the wire wound DAILs. If it's not, if it's just in a power supply, if it's in the signal section like a cathode bypass cap, I will use a thick film resistor for that. Also, we'll use improved speaker binding posts. For coupling caps, I've been using the orange drops in my version, which is not the best caps, but really, really on the very budget side. So for this rebuild, I will try to use Miflex capacitors, which I would think are probably the highest quality coupling caps that you can get, which do not break completely the bank. And the problem with those is that they're really big, so I will see whether I can use them or not. And another thing that I will do is to lower the feedback loop, so less dB on the feedback. And eventually, when you have the triode switch, when you flip in the triode mode, it will have lower gain, and that as a result will also result in having a lower feedback. So when you flick the Dyna into triode mode, you hear not just the effect of how it sounds in triode mode, but how it sounds with the lower feedback. And of course, we cannot just take out the global feedback completely, because then the amp would have tremendously high resolution. I mean, not resolution, but input sensitivity. And you wouldn't be able to use it, because even at a minimal volume input, it would be already playing at full volume. We can't have that. But if you just decrease the feedback a little bit, then what will you gain is that basically you will not have a need for an active preamplifier anymore, but your input sensitivity will be such that even like with half a volt input, you already have maximum output. So it means that you can use a passive volume control, which is much higher quality than any active preamplifier. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this has been useful for everyone. Answered a couple of questions. And next episode, I'm going to talk, or actually start talking about loudspeakers, which are suitable for high quality mid-range reproduction with the Dynaco Stereo 70, or if you have direct heated triodes or single-ended triodes or any kind of amp which you want to use for mid-range and musical sound. Thank you. Please like and subscribe. Bye bye.